Hello, hello everyone. I welcome everyone who is joining us online and also the people here in the room. Before continuing, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land, and I also would like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation. This session is organized and facilitated by Oxford HR. Oxford HR is a consultancy firm involved in recruiting and also supporting remarkable leaders for organizations with a purpose in this world. We are here with 3 people. We have mixed up with our Asia director, and Arnie in the back of the room, who's a researcher. They both came over from Singapore to join us here. And my name is Josje Reinartz. I'm with Oxford HR since 4 years. Before that, I was for 20 years involved in leadership roles in humanitarian organizations, mainly Medicine Sans Frontières. This session is about the growing trend of co-leadership in international organizations as a way to forward decentralization of power and enhance decision-making. The workshop explores the reasons, the opportunities, the challenges, and the lessons learned. We will later have 3 people who will join us online, who are current co-leaders, and they tell about their experiences. And we will also have one of our colleagues, Sobhi. He will join us in a video. We will tell a bit about the background and the theory and the development of co-leadership over the years. But first, I actually would like to see who we have in the room, or where we are in the room, and also who we have online. So could you please all open your phone, connect to menti.com, and put in the codes that we show here. So as I told you, we will have several guest speakers online. The first one is Sobhi Khatib. He is one of our colleagues. He explains us about the theory and the background of co-leadership, and he does this through a video.
Welcome everyone to this session about co-leadership. With you, Sobhi Khatib. I work at Oxford HR as a senior consultant. Those are some of the organizations I have worked with also in the last 20 years in different capacities, mostly focusing on diversity and inclusion, innovation and strategy, storytelling, and leadership. Today we'll talk about co-leadership, and let's start with the definition. So co-leadership, as you can see in the 2 different definitions here, it's about 2 people who are at the top of the organization. They're working together to take the organization to the next place and to achieve the goals. We're talking about 2 or more because some organizations have 3, some even have 4. But in this presentation, I'll mostly focus on 2 because this is the most common model. If we want to track back the history of co-leadership, we can go very much back in time actually to the Roman Empire, where they will hire 2 counselors and they will work together, those 2 counselors, and then they will leave after 4 years, and then other 2 will be chosen and so on. And this was the way to manage the empire. And then we basically had more in history kind of like solo leadership until I would say like those models started emerging again in the 80s and the 90s, mostly for hospitals and for public health sectors. But then they started slowly taking also a presence in other places. This article here talks about actually how rare it is co-leadership, and this was in 2009. And we know maybe that some of those trends have changed since then. This is why we're actually here and talking about it. So we look at this article by Harvard Business Review, it's from August 2022, and it talks about, is it time to consider co-CEOs? And this is interesting because here we're not only talking about the non-profit sector, we're also talking about the for-profit sector. And many financial institutions have taken this as the model actually follow. So why is that? And what can we take from that as well? The main thing to say before I dive into that is that you should not consider co-leadership if you have crisis. And this is an important one to say because co-leadership will take time. The learning curve is a bit steep sometimes for some people, especially if it's their first time. Organizations will need to change in their structure, processes will need to be put in place. Many things would need to be on the move. And of course, it might be like any other change. I would say many of those changes, you should be careful doing them during a crisis time. So this is kind of like the warning label. Don't do this if you are in a crisis mode. When to consider that? Well, some organizations are doing the co-leadership because they see it as a way to reflect the sharing of power between global north and global south. So some of organizations find this way of showing how they share power to the stakeholders, different stakeholders, and to the staff. And for them, this is a way to show how this can work also in place. So this, of course, follows the trend that we see that like more money is shifting to the field instead of the headquarters. We see that there's a lot of like local partners many times in the picture. And so this is kind of like the more natural step to continue with that. Maybe before I continue, it's good to say, I'm not here to advocate for co-leadership or against leadership. I'm just here to share with you some of the reasons why it's done and how it's done, not really, maybe a few points about how it can be done well. Second reason some organizations do it is the attention that we're having lately on the work-life balance, especially that we are seeing more and more people getting burnout in different sectors, but definitely in the humanitarian sector and in the NGO sector in general. So this is one of the reasons to go for co-leadership. And here we have also two paths. Like one path is having the two leaders work part-time. And this would get people like have less stress. The other way is having those two people sharing different roles. And this is important because then you will have focus on something, and then you know that you need to do that, and that's your focus, and the other person will do something else. Instead of having sometimes leaders who become a bottleneck because they have so much coming back to them. Even after they delegate, everything comes back to them to make some decisions. The third reason is about fostering feminist leadership mindset. And this is another trend that it's also raising lately. And this is where when we talk about feminist leadership, we talk about collaborative structures, we're talking about like more horizontal structures. And this is one of the things that some organizations decide to basically have co-CEOs to reflect that in the change of their teams. So it's kind of like having this like showcase in a way that is showing what their values and what they believe in the way they work as an organization as well. Common mistakes and myths around co-leadership, we start with the most common one. It's about chemistry between two people. No, it's not about chemistry. And this is also for me actually a surprise when I was like reading some interviews and some research, because it is very much about trust more than the chemistry. So you might not have a chemistry with a person, and that's okay. They don't need to become your friend. But it's very much about the trust. And the trust here we talk about trusting that the other person can do well in the areas of focus that they have. Trust that we're both here for the better goal of the organization. Trust that we're doing this together and we're staying doing this together. Because you don't want, I would say, a situation where you have two co-leaders and then you're kind of like considering having one of them to continue, this will not be good, and this will not reflect a very collaborative and trust atmosphere. So you basically also need to be clear with the people that either we will continue with both of you or not. And this is just also like to make it clear that we are here to do those things together, especially for people who are doing it for the first time as co-leader. Another point and another myth is that people think that it's more stress for co-leaders when they need to work with another person. And this is also not true. Because you will have, first of all, like processes in place to understand what you should do and how you should do it. And once those things are agreed, there's not much stress. If you have nothing and you just like put two people into a place and you say figure it out and there's no trust and no environment to support how they can do it, that can be definitely stressful. So one of the main also conditions to have a good co-leadership is to have a good board who would be supporting, staff who would be also understanding that the learning curve would take time for them and for the co-leaders, and that will all minimize that stress. The focus is basically actually like one of the points I put, because it's about understanding that each person will have their area of focus, and that will also keep it a bit, I would say, easier for them. Some would say, well, it won't bring much added value for the organization, because like, you basically, instead of like one director, you have two, and we're paying more, and this is costing us a lot. Actually, there is a reason why, for-profit organizations go for that path, because they see as well the added value, and the added value here is innovation mostly. Innovation is something that would help the teams and the people and the organization to bring something that maybe wasn't there before. And this could be really, I would say, like a game changer for the organization. So innovation can definitely be one of the, I would say, the added values that co-leadership can bring, mostly because, well, the more people you have, the more brains you will have this also out of the box thinking as well present. Last one is about staff being confused to whom to report. Well, if you have process in place, if everything is done with transparency, if everything is done well, no one will be confused. You would know to whom to report, how to keep each other updated. And this is also like one of the things that doesn't need to be done before you hiring the co-leaders, and they can do it with your support. But it's important also to make sure that your staff will be part of the process as well. Because one of the things, as we mentioned earlier, you want to foster this collaborative work with everyone. Of course, sometimes some decisions need to be made, but it's important to understand that those processes will be there and lasting for years. It's good to invest good time and energy in making them be working well. Two important things to mention before I finish. I will just go to the benefits and the strengths of the co-leadership for a bit. Research shows that it leads to better decision making. And maybe it's, I would say, like, it's easy to think about this one because you will have more people who are thinking about it. Some leaders are used to, have the final say, and so they will hear advices, but they would know that they will have the final say. But in this case, no. In this case, you would need to argue your points. You would need to listen to other person's points. And so this would definitely lead to better decision-making. Maybe a bit of, I would say, a longer process, depending also the process you put in place, but it would bring definitely the best results. The stress is shared and divided, which makes it less for everyone involved. And here we're talking about the co-leaders, but also in general, if you would like to roll this through all your organization. The main risk and the challenge is the learning curve, because any change will start with a bit of a dip. So this is where you are, and then you will have a dip of that learning curve that could be weeks, but most probably months. And then things will go up and you will perform well. But meanwhile, it will be a learning curve for everyone involved. for the co-leaders, for the staff, for the stakeholders, for the funders, for everyone maybe involved. So that would mean lots of resources. And you need to look at this as investment. And you need also, and this is what I also said, maybe not in a crisis situation, because you need to have this buffer to make sure that you can go beyond that curve and start performing. So this is, I would say, the main risk, which is maybe a big one for many organizations sometimes. There are a few needed personal characteristics for anyone who will be filling a role of leadership. We start with self-confidence, and let's not confuse it with, I would say, ego or assertiveness or strong character. Self-confident is people like who know that they can do some things, and they trust others that they can do some things, and they are very much aware. And this will bring me to the next point about self-awareness. It's a big one, of course, but here we're talking about people who are aware of their weaknesses and their strengths. They know when they should step in and when not. They are aware of their styles. They can communicate what they feel, what they think in a very clear way. So this self-awareness is a key when we talk about the characteristics when you want to hire someone for a co-leadership role. Ability to collaborate, maybe it's a given, but it is something that very, very important to check before you start having two people on board to become co-leaders. And this can be, of course, done and checked, like to see how those people work with senior leadership management people before. Last one, and I usually would say for recruitment, you should look not only at the experience, but also at the potential. But in the different interviews and literature around co-leadership, from background and experience came a few times. And here it came maybe a few times because people need to look and see the other person as equal. And this is very, very important for people to make sure that they can trust those areas with the other person and they can work on their own. So make sure that you have equal strong leaders to be in that co-leadership position. Here I reached the end of my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention and for listening. If you have any questions or you would like some resources, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or via other channels. I wish you a good and a nice continuation of the session with my colleagues, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you to Sobhi, who couldn't be here today. For all the people who came later, here as well as online, just shortly, this session is organized by and facilitated by Oxford HR. We are a partner to the Center for Humanitarian Leadership for the past 3 years, and we are a global consultancy dedicated to finding and supporting leaders in a non-for-profit sector. We see an increasing trend of co-leadership. This is why we let Sobhi tell a bit about the theory. And we have also joining us online 3 people who have either recently or are currently co-executives in international organizations. They will tell about the reasoning for co-leadership. A very strong reason is an urge to decentralize the power and to enhance decision-making globally. And we will ask those people to talk about their current and former experiences. And first I would like to check, Gerard, are you still there?
Yes, good afternoon.
So, Gerard from Mourik, he will introduce himself and he will talk to us about his experience when he was a co-executive for the Global Network for People Living with AIDS, with HIV.
Yes. Thank you very much, Josje, and thank you for this amazing opportunity to share some thoughts about co-leadership with you. My name is Gerard. I am from the Netherlands, and I am married to Ayo. Ayo is an amazing man from Nigeria, a doctor, and we are together since 2006. We've been working for UN agencies, NGOs, and other organizations around the globe. And for the past year and a half, that is from June 21 till the end of last year, I was co-leader of the global network of people living with HIV, a global network of advocates to improve care and love for people with HIV around the world. Last December, I started a new assignment with Rabobank as their spokesperson in the Netherlands. Looking back at being a co-leader with GNP+, why do I think co-leadership is important? The reasons for co-leadership. I think we're looking at decades of colonial relationships between global North and versus global South, which we can change. It is about who decides and who can give and who receives money and the power to use the money. We see an unequal power relationship with donors based in the global North and implementation based in the global South. We cannot go on like that forever, I believe. It is unsustainable and inefficient. How can we move forward together? That is what the rest of my presentation is also about, is what do we do with an old way of doing things and the need to change. The second slide is about co-leadership and value add. Yes. When I started as co-leader of GMP+, the global network of people living with HIV, my co-leader colleague and I, we started develop a role share plan to determine the shared competencies. For example, a role share between communications and finance. It is important to avoid a top-bottom dichotomy. We are not each other's bosses, but partners. To give you a concrete example, I was leading in governance, finance, HR, and fundraising. My co-leader colleague covered for comms and program. So important to say that we are not each other's bosses, but partners as co-leaders, and that it is around an increased trust and an increased participation, which is about better decision-making within the workplace and also among external stakeholders. Two directors who bring expertise. External stakeholders, what I heard a lot and often is they were excited about the innovation we as GMP Plus developed, which led to an increased trust, increased participation. We heard it before. More equality for staff and more investment. The third slide is about the risks. Yeah. In my experience, co-leadership is not a cure-all. We watch out for competing interests and interpersonal conflict, which is the case in, I would say, all the organizations I worked for, and generally in all organizations, that you have to be mindful of interests and interpersonal conflict competing with each other. Another risk is the non-clarity in role share, which can lead to overlaps and lopsided results. It means an unclarity about responsibilities. A way to address this is to have what we did in GMP Plus, setting for regular meetings to keep an open dialogue and to create a context of openness and being able to speak with one another. Another risk is that the distance between the co-leadership's locations can slow down decision-making and create gaps in quality between offices. In my opinion, but it's not a matter of a law, co-leaders are ideally in the same place because different times different locations bring different times and laws. It's an interesting risk to take care of. Slide 4 is about solutions. Solutions to answering the risks. To set a clear role share from get-go, what will each co-executive director do to avoid non-clarity issues? Teamwork makes the dream work. That is my experience. Regular sharing, scheduled meetings, and the more we talk, the more we can implement and solve our problems. Another solution for potential risks is, it was very interesting to hear your colleague saying this before, to appoint an experienced oversight board so that uneasy problems can be easily solved. The last slide is a summary I would like to leave for you. Co-leadership, as I experienced, is an exciting way to move forward to a more equal global compact. And results are more sustainable and in long term more cost efficient. We should not continue to waste money, and cost efficient is saving money. And if we leave it the old way, we keep pouring money. And the way I experience co-leadership is really create a dialogue in a world that is increasingly polarized. So I think co-leadership is really, really interesting to consider. Thank you. I'm here to address and speak more questions too.
Thank you, Gerard. We have later more time for questions, but I think it's good if we first invite Fredrick, who is also online. Fredrick, can you hear us?
Yes.
Very good. So maybe, Fredrick, we give you the floor so you can tell the audience about your current experience at AD International as a co-executive.
Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Fredrick Ouko. I'm speaking from Nairobi, Kenya. I work for AD International, which is a disability organization whose vision is for a world in which ableism no longer exists and disabled people can participate fully in society. Our mission is to support disability rights activists and organizations to tackle ableism and advocate for disability justice through grant making, leadership strengthening, and movement building. So we have 6 offices across Tanzania, Uganda, Sudan, Cambodia, Bangladesh, and UK. So when I joined AD, it's now been a year as a co-leader. And the reason why I was attracted to this concept of co-leadership and why actually I applied for this job, this role, was the fact that, yes, sometimes we struggle when we are left alone to do certain things. You don't know whether you are doing the right thing, or you messed a bit and you don't have someone to really reconcile with in terms of asking them whether this is right, and just agree before moving forward in terms of making a decision. And we all know no one is an island for sure, really. There's a way that someone else can enrich your idea and to make it more powerful and more sustainable in terms of if it was decision making. So it means that the organization benefits more if you had people talking around a particular idea to make it better for the sake of the organization. And of course, we don't hold monopoly of ideas as human beings, and because we are all diverse, we have diverse expertise, and so it means that if you have a co-leadership model, this is what the organization then benefits from, because you are very sure of the leadership sharing around what is best for this particular organization and enriching themselves. So before they make a particular decision going forward, for them, which the organization does benefit going forward. So really, I think this is the importance of having a co-leadership within organization. I think it also brings kind of a strengthened resolve in making difficult decisions. You will always hear that leaders are the ones who have the corner office, because everyone goes to them and they think they know everything, really. While there's really difficult decisions sometimes that you have to make for an organization, or when you're undergoing a particular challenge or something. When you are 2 or 3, it gives you some sort of, you really try to look at different corners of a particular decision before you make it, because you try to paint scenarios, and because you know you have the ultimate responsibility for that particular decision, so you try to cover a lot. But if you are just one person, so it's just you, so and you'll need to take the flag for everything, because people think, oh, you just made an irregular decision, or you are just rushing. But when you are 2, you try to look at different scenarios before making that decision, so you are really sure that we've tried our best, and this is the best decision in this particular circumstance. So I think co-leadership does help with that within an organization. And collaboration is something that usually is worked on. Collaboration doesn't happen by itself. And co-leadership is what does breed collaboration within an institution, because when now people see that actually these 2 leaders are working together and it's actually working for the organization, they have no reason why also they shouldn't work together. They shouldn't collaborate on tasks that ensure that there's efficiency within the organization and pushes the mission and the vision of the organization going forward. I know it has also been talked that shared decision making strengthens the organization. Really, it does, because there's some sort of sense of cohesion when people are agreeing, or you try to talk about a decision before you make it, because then you have the liberty of considering various metrics before making that particular decision. But if you are alone, it just rests on you, and you don't have the liberty of consulting. With your, you'll say someone who's at the same level with you before then passing it over to as a decision towards those working within the organization. In my second slide, I try to look at the opportunities why we should actually embrace co-leadership. In co-leadership, there's the breadth and depth of ideas that is at the disposal of the organization. Because you will find I come with my own ideas. My co-lead was called Marianne Clements from the UK, will also try to source around for a number of ideas, and all of these then it means is available for the organization to explore, and we are leading the organization to explore those ideas and really going deeper, because using our own networks individually and researching around an issue, then bringing all that to the table, then it does help the organization to have a different perspective around an idea and how that is utilized within the organization. Creativity. There's room to try different new things, because now you are two people and you kind of try to mix both your strengths to bring them together in terms of making decisions or working on things that the organization is responsible for and improving the objectives of the organization. So that really does make a point for why we should embrace co-leadership as a concept in terms of leadership. Crowdsourcing of solutions to emerging challenges. I talked about the fact that we all have different networks. It means that the organization can then benefit tapping from all these networks that we have and looking at the solution, that what could be the potential solution to a particular challenge we are facing. So if I'll go with that as my homework, and Marianne also goes that with as her homework, taps into her networks, it means that the things that we bring on the table are really well researched. We have the possibility for many solutions that then we are applying within our decision making or within the organization, that then it enables us to move faster or really benefit from that particular variety of ideas towards a solution or challenges that we are facing. The risk appetite is actually enhanced, and you know, the more you take risk in terms of, and risk is not only about things that are wrong or something. Risk appetite does enhance innovation in any organization. So it means that when you concur about something, that could this be the best option, or what do you think about this? And you're asking yourself, you're contemplating, and then it means that, yeah, let's take it, because what could happen wrong? Maybe it's only this, and so we need also to prepare about that. So you'll have different variation of plans on how to approach that particular risk. And so you are more comfortable taking a particular risk that then enables the organization to move faster in a particular direction that then you can, all of you agree on going forward. There are, of course, challenges, and every leadership model does have some drawbacks, as it were. So, of course, there's a mention around confusion around line management that can only be solved by you agreeing and making up a shared kind of leadership metrics on who's going to do what and how, and who's line managing who, and what is the process of decision making between us, that then the staff do understand and can easily follow. So for ourselves, we've written down, if you want this, you go to this. I'm managing this kind of department. So myself, I'm managing those within the fundraising department. I also, so it goes up to the communication programs as well, and then the others you'll do, maybe if it's HR, finance. So it's very clear. So you'll say, for this type of decision, this is a person you're approaching, but either of us can still make the same decision, but you don't need to go to all of us for one decision. So that would, because we'll bring about duplication, people not understanding how to get quick decision around an issue, especially if it's an emergency. There's some sense that some SLT members might feel alienated, because from the fact that you are co-leaders, it seems you then spend a bit of time together more, and you've kind of known how each one of you operates, so you make decision quite fast. And you remember, this decision also needs to be shared by your SLT members. So it might appear that you agree quite a lot with your co-leader than the SLT, and then that will bring in a sort of, because by bonding, when you work together, and these are just a common phenomena, when you work together, you kind of can anticipate what your other co-leader the decision they might make or something. So it means that it's a process that you've now gelled, and you know what somebody's, you can anticipate thoughts from someone, but then when you present something, they will rebut or something like that. So it's easier for you to agree on something. So then that needs to be brought back to SLT as well, so that they also feel to be part and parcel of making particular decision for the whole organization, and not only the two of you, because then you can agree quite fast. So that risk and that then needs to be captured. There's also the fact that one has to stand for the other colleague's decision to promote unity, because you cannot be, because it's a shared role, it's not separate. If we say this is what we are going to do, maybe if it was because for us we work, so I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and my colleague begins on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So if I made a decision on Monday, it was me who was there working, and so I need to make a decision. That decision needed to be made. And if I didn't have an opportunity to reach out, it means when she comes in on Wednesday, and maybe I'm not working, she'll need to stand with what I made. And if there's anything else, so we need to rediscuss that, because then that means it's a challenge, because people might say that maybe she's just siding, is not bringing a new, yet by virtue of being a colleague, it means we need to agree on most of the, because we've had an opportunity to discuss in the background first. And so it will then take a process of trying to tell colleagues why we did make this, why is it for the best interest of the organization or something like that. What I've learned in this experience now as a co-leader is that actually it's not a one size fits it all. I mean, it takes continuous efforts to get it right. And you must be devoted to put in your bit in terms of effort as a co-leader. So you just don't go in and think it's a normal job. No, you have to continuously work at it. You also need to organize yourself in a way that facilitates achievement of synergy amongst yourself, and then that goes downstream within the organization. Otherwise, there will be pulling apart within the role itself. You might think that either there's one person who is powerful within the role or something if you're not careful. It is very important to schedule catch-up time constantly amongst yourselves, so that you understand what decision have you made, where are we going, and are we working together? Is there something that we need to work on to ensure that we continue working on as a co-lead efficiently and effectively? So you cannot just assume because you have not settled somewhere, you have to meet and discuss issues or review some of the things you've done, so that then it continuously informs how you work together going forward. All leadership models, of course, have drawbacks. It's just about how you work on the good side of that particular leadership model. And so is the co-leadership. So looking at, is it facilitative? Does it bring diversity within the organization? Does it enable us to draw from different expertise that we have for the organization to thrive? And when you figure out that, then it means that you will give it your best and it will going to work for your organization. We have to have clear line management, really. For us, we have a documentation that does spell, it's written, who am I line managing, how are we making decision, when is our working days, and how do we cross over, and how do you reach out when one is not working yet? It's urgent to reach out to them. So really that enables people to be free with you, people to interact with you more frequently, and to feel confident about the leadership itself within the organization. You all need to have shared objectives to make it work. If you don't have shared objectives, it's going to, you kind of two drivers driving in a separate direction. So you have constantly develop shared objectives and talk about them and discuss. Of course, it doesn't mean that you're agreeing on everything, but then you'll always have to, you know how to reach a midpoint that then is facilitative and important for the organization. So these are my few points that I've learned so far. And this is something I could still promote and encourage others to really plug in and make use of it. Thank you.
We still have a third person who we would like to introduce to you. And after that, we have ample time for questions. I already have several questions in mind, actually. So maybe, Vinita, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Thank you very much, Vinita, from the Urban Action Fund for Rights for Women. Maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us about your experience being a co-leader.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much for having us at this conference. Great to be here. So sorry, I'm speaking in virtually, and I'm not here. I'm not there with you all in Australia. But my name is Vinita, and I co-lead the Urgent Action Fund Asia and Pacific. I live in Delhi, so it's about 10 in the morning for me, which is a great time. I understand that it must be afternoon there where you all are. It's hard to make connections when I can't see the people I'm speaking with. So I apologize if I go too fast, or so maybe my friends Gerard and Fredrick, you could help me slow down because I do have a tendency to talk fast. If you can go to the next slide, thank you. So Urgent Action Funds, Asia and Pacific, we are a women's fund, right? And the premise, so I'll speak a little bit very quickly about who we are so that we can ground this conversation because co-leadership is very important to the reason why we exist. So the Urgent Action Funds we are feminist rapid response grant makers. There are 4 of us in the world. There is one in the US. There's one Urgent Action Fund in Africa. There's the Urgent Action Funds in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we are Urgent Action Funds at Asia and Pacific. We are the youngest of the Urgent Action Fund sister funds, as we call ourselves. And each of us is autonomously registered. We are autonomous organizations, and all the UAFs come together to mobilize resources, to do advocacy around human rights issues, or to do some joint communications mandate on the topics we work on. The premise of Urgent Action Funds is very simple, is that women and gender non-binary human rights defenders face risks and threats to their own security and well-being. And in these times of security threats and crises, they need access to quick, non-bureaucratic ways of securing small but critical amounts of resourcing that will help them mitigate those risks that they are facing towards their security and well-being. So we respond to those kind of threats in our region, in Asia and Pacific. We primarily serve women and gender non-binary defenders across a host of movements. So environmental justice, related to labor or union issues, sexual rights, gender issues related to LGBTI communities, those who are opposing any sort of threats to indigenous cultures and regions and access to land and resources, and those who are engaging in the fight towards, pro-democracy movements or civil and political rights issues in each of our countries in the Asia and Pacific region. So we've been in operation for 5 years. And in 5 years, so because each of our grants are very small, we only give up to $5,000 for each of the defenders that reach out to us. If their grants are approved, we have redistributed close to $5 million US in the last 5 years in the Asia and Pacific region. If you go to the next slide, please. So Urgent Action Fund, like I said, has been in existence for 5 years, and we have always been an organization that has had co-leadership at its helm. When the seeds of this organization was formed by two fantastic women who are from Asia and the Pacific, and who did a thorough scoping of the premise of the urgent action funds, to contextualize it to the region. And then they went on to become the founding co-leads. One is Virisila Boadromo, who is a Fijian activist and who lives and works in Fiji. And the other founding co-lead was Mary Jane, who's a Filipino activist. In 3 years into the operations of our organization, we did have a co-lead transition. So Mary Jane transitioned out of the organization, and that's when I came in as the co-lead. So we do have some experience of managing this kind of a recruitment of or this process wherein one co-lead exits the organization and a new co-lead comes in. So across all of this experience of setting up the organization, setting up the co-leadership, managing a transition, and now in this new avatar of a co-leadership, taking the organization to a different level of scale and depth, we have some lessons that we have learned, which I thought would be valuable to share. I think co-leadership we think of it as a great way of sustaining both ourselves and the organization, especially since we are rapid response grant makers. It means that we are constantly responding to crisis related issues in the region. There is a lot of secondary trauma related issues that we face and we have to mitigate for ourselves as well as for the team that works with us. And in this situation particularly, the co-leadership model helps in that it does not put the entire burden or responsibility in this extremely fast-paced and a nuanced sort of work on one person, and we are able to manage those responsibilities across the two of us. We also encourage co-leadership in our team members. So our grants team, which is the largest portfolio and the largest team in our organization, is also co-led by two what we call rapid response grant facilitators. So in many ways, the co-leadership blueprint that you see in the leadership of the organization, which is with me and the other co-lead, you see a lot of reflection of that in the co-leadership that is done by two of our grants facilitators who also come from very diverse fields and regions. Across all of this work, and the reason why I'm giving both of these examples is to underpin that, there is a larger co-leadership sits within a larger political project, and that is one of collective power. And as someone who's been deeply steeped in feminist movements in India and in South Asia, I firmly believe that collective leadership is way more important and way more empowering than co-leadership per se. And co-leadership is an example or a manifestation of collective leadership. But across movements, you see in autonomous groups, in non-funded organizations, in informal associations, you will see there are many examples around us where collective leadership thrives, where participatory decision-making works. And there are brilliant examples. There is, for example, in India, around a lot of sexual rights work, especially around recognizing the rights of those, who are in same-sex relationships. In the early 2000s, in the movement building work that I did around that, we saw that almost the entire process of taking insights from movements to actually turning it into a public interest litigation was entirely done predominantly by autonomous groups, predominantly by movement organizations, where a lot of decision-making, a lot of that work, the work was all related to advocacy and litigation, and that required every one of us to participate and take independent decisions as and when situations arose. And that's a classic example of when it worked. Of course, there are several other examples on when it didn't work, which is where I recognize that some of our own sort of doubts may come in. But I firmly believe that collective leadership gives us a fundamental underpinning, a framework on which we need to pivot co-leadership. And only then we think of it then larger than just a management structure of two people working and so on, right? And that's an important point to think about here. And finally, I think both the last points, which is around setting up the co-leadership, there are many examples around not only recruiting co-leads, but also around ensuring that there is enough resources, time, and attention given to make sure that the co-leadership thrives. I think just putting two people in a co-leadership equation, regardless of how they came to it, is just one part of the puzzle. But there needs to be a larger intention of making sure that we are invested in making that leadership work. And finally, I think this is something that Fredrick gave a lot of examples on. I'm sorry I logged in late, but there were some excellent examples of, two of the co-leads kind of coming in and going out in making decisions and holding each other responsible and accountable. But that clarity and communication is key for a co-leadership model to work. So each one of us, me and my co-lead, who's Virisila, we have individual job descriptions for ourselves, but we also have a collective job description. So we are individually accountable and collectively accountable and responsible. And that is something that we report to the board on, which is something that comes up in our annual appraisal processes. And that kind of clarity also helps us in shaping our own individual and collective mandates for the organization, but it also gives us a little bit of flexibility to remain agile, and that is also very important. Agility is also very important. I was late to this call because I was in an earlier call which my colleague had to attend, and there were a bunch of personal reasons due to which she could not, and I had to step in on that call. So that kind of an agility and back and forth happens only if there is immense amounts of communication where one can step in as the other steps out. It talks to my earlier point of sustaining ourselves, remaining energetic, not burning out, but also gives us the agility to shape each other's roles as we go. And I think there's a last slide. Can you move to that, please? So I think I've already spoken to it as not a panacea. So it's not a solution to all problems, right? And there is an important decision to make on when not to go as a co-leadership. Like, I also sit on a board of another organization that is currently thinking about whether they need to go in for this co-leadership model. And they may not. And my advice there is that if you do not want to go as into a co-leadership model, that's fine too, because that's an organization that has been primarily shaped by one person's vision, and who's a stellar activist. She's a great feminist tech activist, and a lot of credibility of that organization is building, which is in its first year right now, is pinned on the vision of this one founding executive director. And perhaps there is a question around readiness for whether it is the right time to go into the co-leadership model at all. So I think to think of co-leadership as and when organizations need it, people in the organizations, because people make organizations, right? So if there is readiness, if there is a commitment to this larger political process and purpose, and there is clarity in sharing with the team and beyond on why we want to do co-leadership or why we don't want to go to co-leadership, is an important point to consider. In a co-leadership model, I think I'm stating the obvious, but I think of all the times where it has not worked, in many examples around me, it is a function of the two individuals who are in the co-leadership as well. And it is important to for the two co-leads to get along, right? And they don't need to be the best of friends. It's great if they are in some shape or form. I'm a big champion of friendships at workplace, but it is a function of the individual. So each one of us has to be ready. There is a certain level of maturity, there is a certain level of self-awareness of understanding our own areas of improvement, as well as confidence and assuredness in what each one of us excels at, is an important parameter to consider, to again understand whether co-leadership is for you, or to understand whether it's not working, and so on. My slides have gone away, so should I stop speaking? But I guess I don't even know what the last thing was on that slide, actually. I can quickly summarize and say that, you know, there's a lot of impact on team dynamics. I think Fredrick also mentioned it. I won't go further on it. But again, having clarity with teams, making sure co-leadership is more pinned on collective leadership is a way to communicate it better with the teams. So I'll stop there and pass it on to you, Josje.
Any questions?
Yeah, my question is just for the last presentation. You know, you mentioned talking about co-leadership as a part of a bigger piece on an approach and this idea of collective leadership. I was just wondering if we could hear a tiny bit more about, sorry if it's going a bit beyond, but yeah, a tiny bit more about that broader collective leadership idea and what that can look like in practice.
Great. So collective leadership is, I can share more literature with Josje and you can help share it with other participants. There's a lot of scholarship on collective leadership. Collective leadership is like more than two individuals making decisions and, you know, around participatory decision making. That's what collective leadership is. There are a lot of feminist activists, especially Srilata Batliwala, who has written on feminist collective leadership. It can be any of the following examples. So it could be, let's say there's a working group, like we have one. We have a working group of a few staff members who have a consensus-based decision-making on grants approval on the applications we receive for grants from defenders. It could mean, in our board, there are specific decisions that span across board and team on specific issues that, people vote on. It could mean that there is a triad or a quad. So one of the UAFs in Latin America has 3 people in the decision-making team. So they are the co-directors or co-leads team, which is 3 people actually, who are all seen as directors of the organization. So each of these examples just illustrate how collective leadership can work. And I'm happy to pass on more reading material on it.
I have a question then, before we move on. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question more around power dynamics, which has been a big topic of this conference, and trying to redistribute power, and to touch on that point and to be real on that point. In this sector, corruption does exist in levels of leadership and levels of power. And I'm curious about whether any of the speakers have any just personal reflections on co-leadership and what that means for power distribution.
I think this is a very good question for both Gerard and Fredrick, as they both work in a co-leadership with one person in the Global North and one in the Global South. So, Gerard, maybe you first. Can you comment on the question? Did you hear the question?
No, I'm very sorry to say that I couldn't hear the question very well. Let me turn up the volume a bit.
Do I need to move somewhere else?
Can you, oh my. Can you confirm that you can hear me now?
Yes, very loud and clear. Thank you.
Fantastic. Just to reiterate, the concept of power dynamics and trying to break down and redistribute power has been a pretty large topic of this conference so far. And I believe that I've already forgotten his name, but the very first presenter with the recording did mention that co-leadership could be kind of a way to address that element. And so I was curious if any of yourselves would have any personal reflections on your roles in co-leadership and how that may have worked to that effect of redistributing power and even potentially minimizing things like corruption in leadership in the sector. Wow, yeah, that's a very good question, and it makes me very reflective, and I would almost say like philosophical too. I started my presentation with some thoughts around why co-leadership, I think, is important in the world we live today. And that has to do with
the many decades of colonial relationships between global North versus global South. And that's about who decides and who can give and who receives funding and available money. In my case, for fighting HIV and caring for people with HIV around the globe. With the co-leadership concept in place in GNP+, the Global Network for People Living with HIV, I think it has deliberately chosen for a leader from both parts of the relationship, Global North and Global South. And that has proven to be a very powerful combination of people who are fighting through that colonial relationship between both parts of the world. So if you talk about power dynamics, that has been, and I'm sure it still is, very much a leading principle in working together as co-leaders. I want to give an example of the Global Fund for HIV, TB, and Malaria in Geneva that I've been part of as a pioneer, early 2002 to 2003 and 2004, whereby local ownership has been introduced through the country coordinating mechanisms, the local country-based groups where people from all walks of life receive significant funding and decide themselves about how to spend it in the fight against HIV, TB, and malaria, which I think is an amazing principle that deserves more attention and follow-up by many organizations in the globe. So yeah, I could go on about power dynamics, but I think this is what I'd like to share with you so far.
Very much, Gerard. By the way, to inform all of you, we all see all three of you. I know you don't see that, but you are constantly on Sobhi. So I think I should inform you of that. So we see you as a panel, which is very nice. Okay, Fredrick, could you comment to the question?
Yeah, so the issue of power dynamics is one that is really salient, and even so for me, I come in as one, a leader from the global South, two, as someone who has a lived experience of disability in an organization that is working on disability issues but didn't have someone with a disability on the leadership team. And then the board makes a clear decision that we have to have someone with a lived experience also making decision around what the things that we care about. And for information, also our board has a co-leadership chairs. So it's from them that also we tap into how best do we do that. So even when you come and now you are from, so say I'm from Kenya and my colleagues from London, there's in the initial stages there was that impression that I am her assistant, for example, just by the virtue of the fact that she's from London, I'm from Kenya. It took a bit of time even among colleagues to get it that actually we are on the same job role. No one is acting behind the other, like no one is assisting the other, but we are doing the same function. And it took a bit of time for people to try and understand that, and constantly having to explain that, and even in the way we make decisions, that once you get a decision from myself, you don't need to go and concur with Marianne. Of course, it happened for a few 1 or 2 months that people will still be looking out to is it the right thing to do, And so I say yes, but also again, they'll go back to my colleague, just because of that power dynamics in terms of the impression that they thought that, since UK has been seen as our headquarters, so someone from UK needed to say, to okay something for it to be legitimately having been approved. So that's what we've worked on now, and we've done that a decision can come from anywhere, so long as that's a leader within that particular position. And even the way because we've also been restructuring the organization, and so ensuring that some of the positions are taken up by leaders from be it Cambodia, be it Bangladesh, and when they make a decision, that's it. So you don't need to again and really demystifying the fact that since some of our colleagues are in the UK, so the UK is the headquarters. So really working on that and ensuring that people understand it, then trying to now bring down the issues around power dynamics, and that has been really coming up quite well, and everyone now is learning. But initially there was that aspect that if then someone has a role in the north, then they are the ones who are senior, and so we've gone around that, including even having to restructure the way our pay structure is structured. For example, that it's not that now if you are here then you're paid more or something like that. So it's just about that in terms of, because also there's the issue around who is paid how much that comes in with power. And when you work on that, then it means you are redistributing those things, both in terms of leadership, in also compensation, and who gets to approve what and things like those. So really that has been my experience so far, and it's really working in terms of the project around seizing power. And for us, it is that we also ensuring that persons with disability are also making decisions on issues that are affecting them. And that's why we've said we are going towards the mode of participatory grant making, because also it gives them an opportunity to say these are the priorities, as opposed to a few individuals sitting there and saying, deciding for persons with disability that these are actually the priorities, yet the field is actually coming up with different things. And that's what then you get if you allow people affected by a particular issue to make decisions around what is it that is they want to do for themselves.
I'll quickly chime in there and maybe just keep it concise. So I think this issue of representation that Gerard and Fredrick have raised and spoken so eloquently to is something that we are also extremely passionate about, and that is also a way of sharing power, right? Like all the granularity that Fredrick brings in his analysis of North versus South, of representation, of who is seen as the boss, it really touches my heart, Fredrick. Thank you for raising them. I think for us, from where we sit, because we are Asia and the Pacific, and mind you, many of us, even before I came into this job, I would often say Asia Pacific. And that's also a very sort of a colonial, inheritance that we have got, where people say Asia Pacific, whereas Asia and the Pacific are two distinct regions. And it is unfortunately the Pacific that is often misrepresented, misunderstood, and grossly dismissed, given we don't understand a world map based on where each of our Pacific islands come from. They are tiny specks in a world map. It's hard to understand. It's hard to understand the full diversity, and we are often kept away from that kind of work. So in our co-leadership, we are very clear that one of us represents, I can't potentially represent the whole of Asia in its diversity, but at least we have one person who's from Asia and one person who's from Pacific. So that takes care of some of that. And shifting gears to other aspects of power expression, you are right, like in ways that it can actually counter any sort of mismanagement by simply putting an additional check and balance in decision making. So there are two of us who are making decisions, not only for countering corruption related issues, since you mentioned that example, but also more positively speaking to enhance all our work. There are two of us looking at various pieces of work. We can cover the other person's blind spots. That also helps in the distribution of power conversation.
My name's Tessa. I'm from Radar Australia. I have a question about how you operationalise the co-leadership model. So imagine this is an enduring model that your organisations have committed to. So there would be changes in governments and organisational structures. But are the leaders then chosen as a pair? Are you looking for complementary skills, networks, representation? What happens when one leader leaves? Yeah, just interested in your organisation's journey. Thank you.
I remember the question because I remember the process of applying for the co-leadership positions early 2021, I think it was, yeah. And there was a moment in the process whereby I was matched online, because we were still online, you know, in the post-COVID 2020 era, matched with my co-leader in Africa, and it was really like, hey, it's a match. And it's always like that. It's like you don't know what's going to happen, but there is this chemistry and trust, I would say, is also very basic. And from there, it's work in progress. You keep on get to knowing each other with the networks that are coming along with it, which is very, very important. Yeah, it's work in progress. So it's not something that is finished after both co-leaders are on the job, but it definitely progresses, you know, with ups and downs, and that's very much like it is, I think, in many other organizations that are approaching co-leadership in practice. Yeah, very exciting.
Let me add, Gerard, and maybe pass it on to you, Fredrick. So I think, so I'm in, like I mentioned, I'm in a co-leadership where one of the co-leads, founding co-leads, actually exited, and we had a very thorough recruitment process, and it was a competitive process with the board taking the lead. So there are, and Gerard mentions of this of this kind of matching that he spoke about. It's actually the same time as I came in, Gerard, as a co-lead, 2021. So that also works, but I think to add how you operationalize it is two things. One is that how you recruit is as important as how co-leads stay on. Actually in our case, the co-lead stepped out of the recruitment process until a shortlist was arrived at. And at that time, she did get an additional vote to actually talk about a little bit of a vibe check, if that's a better way of, a more casual way of stating it. And then subsequently, we invested the first week of the new co-lead's employment, which is me. We spent in a retreat, the two of us, re-looking at our terms of reference and whether we wanted to, fashion it in a different way. The third thing we have is that we have a coaching space, which is, a coach works with us individually as well as collectively. And that has become a formal space for us to raise any issues, any conflicts, or any ways in which we can strengthen what we call rituals or habits. So as a result of that work, we have instituted like check-ins every 10 days, which is a 2-hour co-leads working block. We have made sure that we become stronger about communicating, bringing each other into every loop on an email or on a signal communication. So just stating some of those out in that coaching space, walking through conflicts has really helped strengthen our model. I'll pass it to you, Fredrick.
Yeah, mine was more about the board saying we have to recruit someone from Global South, and this was open both to Bangladesh, Cambodia, and any other side, but also clear about that they also needed someone with a lived experience as well. So there was some sort of parameters that they were looking at based on what they'd seen within the organization. And so it happened that So I came in and through also our recruitment, just competitive recruitment. And who I get is someone I've worked with like way before, when I was still leading an organization of persons with disability in the field. And they happen to be supporting my organization, which was working with young people with disability in Kenya. And so it's just kind of gelled. So you have someone who's more into, say, the feminist world and these kind of things, but also worked on disability issues. And then you have me, who've been a disability activist for the longer I have lived. And now using those two competencies and now operationalizing that in terms of how we discuss the broader objectives and agreeing and communicating to our staff that this is the direction the two of us think is the best shot for the organization, and changing the culture within the organization. And so it's something that we get time to always discuss beforehand. You don't assume, even though you know in terms of philosophy, in terms of a mix of radicalness within ourselves that we understand both of us do have in certain aspects, but then just clearing out thoughts that, but this is the right thing. Would you do the same if you are left alone, and then agreeing on that? So it means that you're constantly confirming things, checking out, and looking at different nuances around, and then so that then that co-leadership then works in terms of operationalizing it, and then looking at what are the challenges. Are people looking at how often we communicate, or then crafting messages around then what is it that we are working on jointly? And so one of us will send that to the team, or the other one will send if I'm off duty, and maybe covering out, ensuring that one is properly briefed. Maybe if they go on leave, it's a 2-week leave and I'm left working on something. So ensuring that you document that quite properly, that then they are able to just know that they are not repeating themselves in anything if they're coming. So it means it's a piece of work. So you continue working on it and having deliberate times to discuss, and then working out how then that comes around, and how then people feel that there's nothing in between, that there's a gap, that because you're working either on different days or someone has gone on leave and there's something that maybe is lacking in between. No. So at least that's the way we ensure that everything is picked up, even if it's on my docket and I'm not there. So my colleague will pick that up, because I've probably briefed her before I go on leave, so that it continues to be just as it's one role, even though it's two people working on it. Thank you.
Thank you. There is another question in the room. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Philip. I'm co-leading the process to revise and update the core humanity standard, and all of the advantages and benefits are really, really evident. One of the most important ones for me is that I've got kind of emotional support as well from somebody who I trust, and we can mutually support each other when things go wrong, and that's not often talked about. Perhaps you don't feel so lonely. But I want to kind of put the conversation back into the context of kind of the disaster management, architecture that we have right now. We talk a lot about kind of co-leading. We have a humanitarian coordination team. We often have kind of national counterparts working with the humanitarian coordinator. We have clusters, which are often led by international organizations with a local or national NGO as a co-lead for that. Working groups, similar process, and they all talk about co-lead, but the reality, the very blunt reality is, we're kind of asking all of these other co-leaders to conform to systems, processes, procedures, and outputs that are completely alien to them in most cases, and predefined. And we're asking it to do in a very, very short period of time, because it's an emergency response. We've got to get all our response plans out, and we've got to get our funding proposals out, and so on. So my question is a bit of a reflection. I mean, these relationships sound like they work because you've invested time in them. How do we kind of change the system to invest the time to help the ones in the positions of power within that kind of system to recognize that and kind of devolve that power and change their own management and leadership style to be more open? And how do we support the ones that we're asking to sit in these structures and processes, the national government or the national NGOs? How do we help them to navigate a complex system that isn't their own to begin with? So I don't know if there's a quick answer to that, or if there's a way that we can think about how we can quickly inject that kind of skill set, which is really, really unique, into a system that doesn't seem very open towards that.
It's a very nice question. And thank you for raising emotional support and loneliness. And I think I don't have a concrete answer to your question, but it makes me very reflective again. But I think by continuing to speak about the principles and the whys we want co-leadership in this world to be promoted, the better. And so, for example, for GMP Plus, the global network for people living with HIV, we are all HIV positive. I'm HIV positive. And we are in 2023, and there are still many, many countries around the globe where it is not easy to talk openly about being HIV positive. And that alone already for me was and still is a reason whereby when I'm able to lead or co-lead, lead or co-lead, regardless, I'll speak about the issues of what you mentioned, emotional support and loneliness, because that is what we all deal with as leaders and co-leaders, and HIV positive as well. Keep on talking about it, keep putting it on the agenda, speak out loud, regardless where you are and whom you are with. I think that's very exciting and important. Thanks.
Thank you, Gerard. I'm shortly going to interrupt the panel because there's someone in the room who wanted to specifically comment to the question also, which was really about, especially also in short-term situations, how do we help organizations and people to deal with the systems that are put on them while they are not used to using them?
Yeah, because I really liked what you said, Philip. So what happens traditionally...
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. So my name is Jacqueline and I'm from RMIT University. So what we see, for instance, in the last year or so is like when you look at Ukraine, Syria, Turkey, and more recently Sudan, all of a sudden they've got this sudden onset disaster, which has escalated, and there were already organizations within these countries operating probably more in terms of a development type of, program. And all of a sudden now they're thrown into this, emergency response setting. Their leaders may not be equipped or able to handle the scale of projects that are coming at them. There's funding often coming in really quickly. So you do need to bring someone in alongside them. But however, the first speaker spoke about how co-leadership shouldn't be in a crisis setting. So I recognize why, and that's important, but I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are around how you might approach like what is happening literally around the world in many places for a co-leadership position, for someone to come alongside an existing country director, CEO, whatever a leadership position may be, to support them in this sort of crisis setting.
I can answer to that, but maybe my colleagues as well.
Yeah, can I respond with just a specific example, because sorry, Gerard, and thanks for opening that up. So we started our co-leadership 15 days like on the 15th of August, which is when the Afghanistan crisis broke out. So I was to join in my co-leadership in early September, and since the crisis was so vast, I actually preponed my joining as the co-lead of Urgent Action Fund Asia and Pacific. So I did join at the height of a crisis that became even greater as the weeks unfolded. I think how this co-leaded this. It was, we always call it baptism by fire, because it helped the existing co-lead, which is Viri. It helped her make some very brave decisions, because there was another person who was also validating and helping make those decisions. So we made a lot of our grant making through indigenous banking systems, something that we had never done before. So we did pivot in a big way. Like 2 days after the crisis began in Afghanistan, we were one of the first people to move in money into the hands of women and gender non-binary defenders in Afghanistan to manage that crisis. The second thing was that, it helped us also shift a little bit in our mandate. So if you recall, in the first 2 weeks since the airport shut down, the first from 15th to the 30th of August, that airport was open. And there were several defenders, especially high-risk journalists, people who had been in Supreme Court judges before in the previous regime, women's rights defenders, were all trying to flee the country. And it is then that we worked. There was a lot of backdoor advocacy that all the urgent action funds did to make sure that human rights defenders were within the remit of specific governments and embassies that were doing evacuations at that time in Afghanistan. Again, this was something that we as Urgent Action Fund had never done, but the situation called us to take on that mantle and really advocate on behalf of women and gender non-binary defenders to make sure that they left. Across all of this work, this sort of new co-leadership really helped, because it brought in some new energy. It brought in an extra person, like literally an extra body to manage multiple. We had about 300 defenders' names in the first list we sent out to several embassies and missions to make sure that these people were prioritized in their evacuation efforts. So it gave an extra set of hands and legs. It gave an extra pair of brains, and it also made sure that there was more energy behind making some radical decisions around mandate expansion than we had done before. I'll stop there and pass it to you, Gerard.
Thanks. Yeah, very, very good to hear about your engagement in Afghanistan at a very crucial time for people there, and the opportunities you use to assist very vulnerable people. It's really beautiful to hear. I wanted to briefly mention the situation in Ukraine, the war that broke out early 2022. Ukraine has, in Eastern Europe and linking Central Asia, the largest population of people with HIV, over 250,000. Not many people know that. So GNP Plus was asked to assist at the early, at the beginning of the war, people who did not have access to their ARVs. We as HIV positive people, we keep alive by taking 1 or 2 pills a day, and we are, becoming 100 if everything goes well and you don't stop in between your treatment. So a conflict is very much impacting the lives of people with HIV who are on treatment as well. And so we were asked to assist through the Global Fund in Geneva and USAID and other donors and stakeholders, Ministry of Health in Kiev, etc. But a few weeks or months into that war, my colleagues in Africa in particular said, why are we paying so much attention to a war in Eastern Europe while we in Africa have similar wars and there was nobody in the world who was assisting us, us being people with HIV on treatment, requiring their drugs. So that's, and I keep it very short, but that was a, I'd say not a discussion, but a realization for many of us to, not to be too focused on a war in Ukraine, and this may sound a bit difficult, but there's many conflicts and wars in other parts of the world where people with HIV, where we are very vulnerable as well. And why do we not get equal attention and funding and ARVs, the drugs, in other parts of the world as well, like people in Ukraine were asking?
Gerard, sorry, I have to kind of stop. We are running out of time. I would shortly like to give the floor to Fredrick to comment to this same question. How do you deal, or how does co-leadership work, or how do you deal if you put leaders in a situation where they have to deal with systems and accountability that they are not used to? Fredrick?
Yeah, so just a case in point is we are currently dealing with the situation in Sudan, because we know we have an office in Sudan, and this is not what we are built for in terms of humanitarian response, and at some point we can't even reach our staff. There's issues with power, internet, connectivity, and all that. Yet there's some programs that we're running, and now even having to begin to think around the safety of our staff. This is really not what we signed up for, really. And so it's taking us to a new level in terms of who do we try to consult, because we really don't know. Neither have I been to Sudan, for example. And so it's then trying to rely to either contacts we had in the past, all of us, and then looking at who else within our staff has had in the previous job working with people or no organization that is in Sudan already, and trying to see how best do we assist our colleagues, and then moving a step further to how then do we organize support to organizational persons with disability in Sudan, because if the magnitude of the current conflict in Sudan, it means it will hit persons with disability even double in terms of both the movement, feeding, and all these kind of things. So it's a whole experience for us. We are still actually in the preparatory phases of looking at how do we organize support, and we are reaching out to various also humanitarian agencies also, but first trying to reorient them around disability issues and how we should care around persons with disability in a conflict situation, but also how do we then move support to them and organize that. So really that's not what we are usually used to, but then we are learning on the job on how, because we are there already, so it means we should do something, even if that's humanitarian response is not our mandate. How then, for the people we care about and support, why should we sit back and not do something? So it's also about what is happening, and the fact that you need to do something, and then also reorient those who are used to working within those systems to know that also there are people usually who are left out in ordinary response, and getting their views around how they will need to be supported, and not thinking that you actually know how to do that. So really is about looking around, asking, and then responding based on what you've heard, that this is the best way that we could be assisted in this particular situation.
Here, Gerard, Fredrick, Vinita, we wish you had you with us in the room, because we could continue to discuss this for a long more time, and we would like to take you after the plenary also to our network session. But I think I would like to hand over the microphone shortly for this part of the session to Nick, Oxford HR's Asia Director, who wants to make a concluding remark. And after that, we check out. I hope you stay with us online, and we will connect in the future. Thank you so much. Applause for our panel.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
can
you
I reiterate Josje's thanks? And Josje, you did a great job pulling some real experts together, sharing insights, sharing thoughts. I think one of the things that has struck me, being based in Asia for 20 plus years, is I've now got to start calling it Asia and the Pacific. So Vinita, I'm on your side there, I get it. The other thing that I reflect on is that when we talk about co-leadership, it's leadership almost in its purest form. Everybody talks about future leaders, savant leadership, sharing leadership. Everybody talks about collaboration. Everybody talks about how new leaders have to embrace the collective wisdom. Yet what we're seeing here is a hybrid version of that perfect leadership model. And it doesn't come easy. It's hard work. You might not agree all the time, but fundamentally you work together. So I take my imaginary hat off to you guys and say you've perfected it. And thank you for sharing the insights. You might make my job a little bit easier or more difficult in terms of how do we find people like this? How do we search for people like this? How do we recruit people like this? And how do we hire people like this? These are all challenges that we have to deal with. But certainly from a leadership perspective, again, thank you for your time. And thank you as an audience for the questions and the insights and the sharing. Josje, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Before we all go, I still would like to involve all of you in the room and online in another session of Menticom. So can you please switch your phones back on and go into Menticom. Also, everyone online, please. Also, the panel speakers, please grab your phone. We can see you. Nick, next question. Next slide. I announced it already. How would you rate your current energy level? And it better be higher than it was, not? I want to see more very highs. Okay, that's very good. Thank you. Thank you all. We have one more. Nick, next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, back. Okay, in one word, how would you feel about, or 2 or 3 words? You can use 1, 2 or 3 words. How you feel about co-leadership as a strategy to decentralize power and to enhance decision making. The curious is rating big, as we can see. So work to go. Innovative, empowering, increase. I see some very exciting contributions here. Unsuitable for humanitarian. The way to go. Interested, very interesting. Curious, systems, leadership. Important. Potentially useful, creative. Okay. Thank you all very much. I think this is where we want to end this session. Again, I thank all of you for coming to the room, all of you online to joining us, the panel again joining us, the Center of Humanitarian Leadership for organizing this conference and giving us the opportunity to really participate in it. And Deakin University for hosting us, of course. Thank you very much.